Hey everyone, it's Aldo from Kixie. So one of Kixie's primary use cases is speed to lead, meaning that the minute a prospect raises their hand and expresses interest in your solution, we want to call and text them right away. So in a previous video, I showed how you can achieve speed to lead using high-level CRM's workflows combined with Kixie's Power List. Today, what I want to talk about is how to measure the effectiveness of that strategy. So what we're going to do is show you how to track lead response times in high-level CRM. And just so you know, this solution I'm about to present works with any CRM that Kixie integrates with because we include all the same data in all of the webhooks that I'm about to show you. But for this one, I wanted to use high level. I think it's a pretty good use case, and it ties in well with the video that we made recently. And I'll go ahead and include the video for that speed to lead use case in the comments below, just so you have some context in case you missed it. Now, this all begins with a webhook from Kixie, but what's cool is that this is actually going to use the start call webhook, and I'm actually ridiculously excited. I'm actually embarrassed by how excited I am about this. But I never really get to use the start call webhook for any of my use cases. End call or disposition are usually the most popular ones that we use, but today we're using start call. And the reason we're using start call is because we want to know from the time that a contact gets created in high level to the time that it takes for a Kixie phone call to begin, to be initiated. That's what we're trying to measure here. That's what I mean by speed to lead response time. So what I did is in high level, I created this field. It's a numeric field called lead response time. But let's go back to Kixie for a second. We're using our webhook to communicate when the call begins to a new contact. The way that webhooks work is I'm using Zapier as my kind of in-between tool. And we're going to trigger this Zap with webhooks by Zapier. What happens is Zapier will give you what's called an endpoint URL, and then you plug that endpoint URL over here, and you say, I want the webhook to fire when the call starts. It has to be an outgoing call that begins, and send it to this endpoint URL, which is this Zap. So once we're here, once a phone call begins, this Zap gets activated. Now there's a few key pieces of data that we include in the webhook payload. One of them is the CRM contact ID. We're going to use that to know which contact is being dialed. But this is super cool, and I honestly didn't even know that we included this until today. Originally, what I was going to do was I was going to use that contact ID to then fetch the create date for that contact in high-level CRM, but I don't even have to. We include it. So over here, you can see that we include the date and time that the contact was created in high level. So the difference between when the contact was created versus when the call begins, that's our speed to lead response time. So the next step. Hey guys, it's me. It's Aldo from Kixie. I'm actually interrupting my own video right now because I realized I left a pretty crucial component of this solution out in the original. I was rewatching it and I was all distraught. I told my producer Jasper that we can't actually publish this as is because this Zap is incomplete. So I'm going to walk you through the part that I left out initially, and I'm going to explain what this is. So what we need to do is run a check in the CRM to get the contact information and figure out if the lead response time field that we created already exists, meaning is it already populated with data? If it's already populated with data, we don't want to continue. So I'm going to use High Level's API to get the contact information. And what that's going to do is include the custom field ID. So if you're trying to figure out what the custom field ID is from High Level, you can inspect and it should show you the custom field ID. Or you can do what I'm doing here, which is just get a test contact where you already typed in a value for the lead response time and then search for that contact with the API, and it'll reveal the field ID like what we're seeing here. So basically, long story short, if a contact already has a lead response time, we want to stop this Zap from running because we don't want to overwrite with a new response time. We only want this to run once per contact. And also, if you already have a bunch of leads in your CRM, and you're implementing this right now, you might want to add some additional criteria here to check to see if create date is after whatever date you implemented this solution. Include that too, because you don't want to go back and start populating your old leads with response times that aren't really speed to lead response times. So once we've identified what the custom field ID is, and we run this check, we'll add a filter step. And that filter step is basically going to say, if that custom contact field ID is empty, go ahead and continue. But if it's not empty, stop here, because we don't really need to do any of the other stuff. We already know what the lead response time is. This also means that at one point in this video, I said that this Zap will only deduct 2 tasks from your allotted task usage in Zapier. This step right here, the API call to get the contact information, that's one additional step. So what that means is that this is actually going to consume 3 tasks instead of 2 tasks, but that's still 3 out of 12 steps total. So most of these steps, including the filter, are free steps in Zapier, but the trigger, the API call, and then the final update to the high-level contact, those are all going to draw from your allotted Zapier tasks. But with that said, as long as you make sure to include that check in the CRM and that filter to make sure the lead response time is blank, the rest of the Zap should work as I outlined in the video that I'm going to return you to right now. So without further ado, here's the rest of the video. Thanks. So the next step is to find the difference between those 2 times. So we're going to use Formatter by Zapier, and we're going to use the date and time event. And the action is going to be to find the difference. Oh, sorry. The action is called compare dates. Where is that? Date, time. Oh, sorry. These are conversions. We set everything in UTC time, so I'm going to go ahead and convert my the time of the call, the timestamp when the call began, from UTC to Los Angeles, which is where I am. And the same for the create date. I'm going to convert the create date from UTC to Los Angeles, which is my time zone. So you would input your time zone here. You're going to convert the CRM create date and the timestamp for the Kixie phone call to your time zone. And then from there, you can go ahead and proceed. So what we're going to do now is going to use this step called date time. It's formatted by Zapier. The event is date time. And then the action is called compare dates. So we take the start date, which is the contact create date, and then we take the end date, which is the Kixie speed to lead phone call, and we're going to compare the difference between those times. So what I see over here is, look at that, 23 seconds. That's awesome. But notice that if it did take longer, like if it took you several minutes or it even took over an hour, or maybe it happened over the weekend and you couldn't call them until Monday and it took days, we're going to have all that information right here. Now we need to select a unit of measurement for time. If you have a 24-hour contact center and you expect all of your leads to be called within under a minute, you could use seconds for your standardized unit of time. But if that's not the case, I recommend minutes, because that way, if it took a couple hours, it would just say 120 minutes, or if it took a day, it would still be more manageable for you to look at than seconds, where those numbers can get pretty big pretty fast. So now what we want to do is we want to convert all of these outputs for days, hours, and minutes, and seconds into minutes. And we won't have to do it for minutes, but we'll convert seconds to minutes, hours to minutes, days to minutes, etc. One other thing I want to call out is you're probably thinking, boy, Aldo, these are a lot of steps in my Zap. That's going to consume my Zapier task usage pretty quickly, but it won't, because Zapier is cool. They actually made all of these formatter steps free. So really, the only steps in this Zap that's going to take away from your task usage in Zapier is the trigger and the final action step. As far as your task consumption goes, this is a 2-step Zap. So anyway, let's go back to converting our days to minutes. We use the formatter in Zapier step and select numbers, and the action is multiply. We're going to take the number of days. In this case, it's 0, but in case it wasn't, and then we're going to multiply it by the number of minutes in a day. We get 0 here, of course, and the same goes for hours. We multiply that by the number of minutes in an hour, which is 60, and right now, of course, we're getting 0 because it happened in under a minute. I don't need to convert minutes to minutes, so I already have that piece of data. And then finally, I want to convert seconds to minutes. So in this case, it's numbers, actions. I multiply instead of divide. I take my output of, I'm in the wrong step here. We're seconds and minutes. I divide instead of multiply, which is what I meant to say. And I take seconds divided by 60 seconds in a minute, and I get this crazy fraction here. But I know that this more or less means that it took 23 seconds, because basically it took under half a minute to call. The next thing we want to do is add all those things up. Right now, it doesn't seem that important because we called in under a minute, but if it took over a minute or over an hour, we would want to make sure that the minute conversions for all of those different metrics of time are all being added up over here. And what we're going to be left with is this crazy decimal. Now, we don't really want this to be in our reports or in our CRM, so I can use this other free Zapier step, which is again formatted by Zapier. Event is numbers, and this one is spreadsheet style formula. This one also doesn't get enough love, but it's super cool. So I can take any spreadsheet formula that works. In this case, I'm using the formula of equals ceiling and then parentheses, and then I got my crazy decimal here that represents minutes, and I want to round to the nearest tenth. And so finally, what I'm left with is 0.39. It's at 0.39 minutes, which is roughly under 30 seconds, to make our initial phone call to our new lead. The final step of this Zap is to actually update the contact record in high level to capture the lead response time. So my action step is lead connector, which will allow me to update the contact in my high level account. The action over here. So high level doesn't include a field for contact ID, but we don't need it. We can use the customer number, which is always going to be the high level contact's phone number. And high level will know which contact record to update based on this phone number. And then all we need to do is go down to the lead response time field, which is somewhere over here. 1 second, let me find that thing. Yeah, so the lead response time, that's the new field that I created. It's a numeric field, and I'm going to input the response time right here. And then what you're left with is what I showed you earlier, which is this lead response time is 0.39. So this is great. But the problem is that you're not going to want to go into every contact record individually to make sure they're being called in a timely manner. So that's where high level's smart lists come into play. So basically, as a sales ops manager, all I want to know about is the calls that took over an hour to complete. So what I can do is create a smart list. And the way you do that is you add a filter, and then you can save it as a smart list. So my filter is if lead response time is greater than 60, and don't forget, this is minutes. So this filter is basically saying, if my lead response time is greater than 60 minutes, I want all of these leads to fall into this list. That way I can start looking at what happened. Was my sales team busy? Did it happen off hours? Do I need to add more sales staff on Wednesdays around noon because I get a lot of leads at that time? You can start drawing some really good insights by having all of your leads that had a slow response time in one list, and then you can start figuring out what went wrong and how to streamline your process. So I'm ridiculously excited about this. There's a crazy siren going on in the background, but that's probably because they're excited about this thing too. If you could think of any other use cases for start time, or if you have any other questions on how to measure the efficacy of your sales process, don't hesitate to reach out to us, and stay tuned for more use cases. Thanks.